everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Jess. I talk about writing, self-publishing, and travel. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about setting and how I choose a location for my stories. But before we get into that, don't forget to subscribe for more videos every week. In a fictional sense, setting is location plus time period. It's where your story is set and when. If you're aiming for some sort of accuracy, for instance, if you write historical fiction or anything like that, this is a really important step in the creative writing process, and this is where the majority of your research is probably going to happen. Now, when I'm crafting my story setting, I have 3 rules that I follow. The first rule is I have to keep it generic. And by keeping it generic, I mean referencing major landmarks without necessarily getting into the nitty-gritty of the town itself. Number 2, if it's not a major part of what goes on in that scene, there is no need for me to over-describe or over-emphasize the setting. The setting is there to orient the reader in time and place, to give them some sort of historical and cultural context for understanding that scene and why the characters behave the way they do. Which brings me to my third rule, which is that I have to do my research. Even if it's a place that I know and I'm intimately familiar with, either because I've lived there, worked there, or had friends there and visited often, I really need to make sure that the information that I'm using is up to date, and also too, that it's all true. I want the characters to feel like real people that you might bump into on the street, and I want that setting to feel like a place that you could possibly visit in your day-to-day life. Let's get into the book talk, and I will break down which books are based on real places, which books are based on imaginary places, and which ones are really hard to categorize. We'll start with Our Infinite Depth, which is a young adult contemporary romance, and it is very, very loosely based on the town of Alliston, Ontario. Now, some of you may know that I did live in Shelburne for a number of years. I've been to Orangeville, Alliston, all the little towns in that general area. Even though it is based on a real place, I never actually named the town. And the reason I didn't name the town is because the whole purpose of the setting in this book was I wanted to showcase and honor the Canadian farmers that made life here in Ontario as good as it is. I did reference some major Canadian cities like Toronto, Oshawa, the University of Toronto, the Highway 401. So there are enough real places, enough notable Canadian landmarks to ground the reader and Gabby in time and place without overbearingly driving home the point that this is a rural setting and a very specific small Ontario town. In The Absentees, I set this story in a fictional town called Mary Lake. Mary Lake, of course, being a totally non-existent place in southern Ontario based on a real place called Port Hope. A beautiful little town, very close to Lake Ontario. I was not really so focused on building setting in terms of making it accurate. And I'll tell you why. Picture a map of North America. Canada's up here, the United States is down here, here's the border. And if you were to put little pins in every place where my stories are set, you would have The Absentees kind of drifting off in a hot air balloon of speculative fiction. Because the reality is that this particular story was so offbeat and required such an enormous suspension of the reader's disbelief that I almost didn't overemphasize the setting because I needed them to focus on what was going on in the plot. Looking back on it, if I were to reapproach The Absentees with fresh eyes, maybe I would actually put a little bit more effort into making this setting more familiar and more Canadian. I never really even specified my character's nationality. I just said that they occasionally become invisible and disappear. The Spirit Catchers is a book that I wrote in 2016, re-released in 2017, and recently redesigned the covers for. So this story has gone through a couple of different iterations, but the one thing that has not changed is the setting. Now, when this book first came out, I was marketing it as a fantasy set in the afterlife. Unfortunately, when most people hear the afterlife, they think of heaven or hell, but I never liked that interpretation, so I decided to turn the entire narrative on its head, and I made the afterlife a place called The Establishment, which is actually a corporation. For the purpose of writing this book and this setting, I just let my imagination run wild. I imagined a world that defied the laws of physics, that defied most people's beliefs about life and death and what happens after we die. And I wove in all these little details for the characters to get tangled up in, and for them to realize that they are just cogs in a very large, mystifying, supernatural machine. You guys have heard me talk about my series far too often on this channel. However, we are going to talk about it again right now because, as you know, the setting was a very crucial part of that story. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to refer to my series as a collective story and not 6 individual ones. When the story starts in 2008, we open with Hannah. She lives in Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada. But of course, as her story unfolds, her journey takes her down to a boarding school in Aspen, Colorado. And there, well, not at the boarding school, but in Aspen, she meets Ray. And Ray has been living on a family ranch that has been in his family for 4 generations. This is a very key part of his identity, of his past and his present and his future. And now for the final stop on our literary road trip, we are going to take a look at the setting for my current project, which is a psychological thriller set in Northern Ontario. I have not been to Northern Ontario. I've been as far north as Barrie, but I haven't actually been up towards Timmins or Cochrane or Smooth Rock Falls or any place like that. I haven't been to Thunder Bay or Sault Ste. Marie or Sudbury. Of course, I've read about all of these places, and I've thought to myself, you know what, I'd like to take a road trip up to Northern Ontario. But the reality is that Ontario is a massive province with a huge landmass, and once you get past a certain point, the roads are completely unmaintained. And I'm talking like up near Moosonee, for instance, not Timmins, but that vast acreage in between those 2 towns, there's really nothing there except for thousands and thousands of acres of boreal forest on top of primordial rock and swamps and lakes and black flies and moose. You're really out in the middle of nowhere when you get that far north. So for the purpose of storytelling and world building, I don't think I'll set the story quite that far north, because I don't think it really makes sense from a world building standpoint, because there's not much up there, right? So I haven't decided where exactly this story will be set, but I love the idea of characters being kind of cut off from the more densely populated urban areas like London or Toronto or Peterborough or Ottawa. So if you guys want to leave a suggestion down in the comments below as to where you think I should set this story, as I said, I'm very open to any place that's around, you know, the Great Lakes, maybe a little farther north, but let me know. I'm here and I'm willing to listen and be inspired. Thanks for joining me on this literary road trip. I hope you enjoyed the various stops along the way, and if you're so inclined, feel free to leave a comment down below letting me know where your story is set, or where you would like to set a story or book in the future. Anyway guys, I hope you're doing well, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye.